It is September the 24th, 2021, a Friday. It's early morning or relatively early morning on the west coast of the United States. It's about 8 a.m. here. We're getting towards the end of September, perhaps even the end of fall in the United States. But according to Keith, it's not just September which is coming to an end. We are reaching the end, or perhaps the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning of startups. And Keith uses Winston Churchill, who I don't know if he was an expert on startups, but Keith, the end of startups is the end of startups as inevitable as the end of September 2021?
Yeah, it sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? What it refers to is the end of the company structure to do startups and the rise of digital distributed autonomous organizations.
DAO, the famous DAOs, they're going to become famous, the new buzzword, or the new sort of buzz acronym of Silicon Valley. DAO. Remember that, everyone? What do they stand for, Keith?
Distributed autonomous organizations. And basically what it's driven by an essay that Elizabeth Yin from Hustle Fund wrote, which is in this week's newsletter, where she talks about mission-driven outcomes. So when you and I want to revolutionize news and create Now TV as an internet-delivered news network globally, basically, she's saying, don't start a company, don't incorporate, basically build a blockchain set of rules, allow submissions of videos and stories into that blockchain-driven, rules-driven thing, and allow the newsroom to be fed from all of that.
How does that differ? How does a DAO differ from a wiki?
A wiki is a centralized, editable website. A DAO can be anything because DAO describes the governance mechanisms more than it describes the thing you're doing.
So Wikipedia could be a DAO if you take out Jimmy Wales and the governing people who run it.
It could, and then Wikipedia, the website, could be rendered from distributed content.
Which it is already, isn't it?
No, it's centralized. It's like you fill in a form and click submit. It's centralized, whereas a DAO is truly decentralized, even at the level of the reward system for the people. Elizabeth Yin describes it as mission-driven initiatives. So you believe in something, you want to do it. It could be for-profit or not-for-profit, really doesn't matter. But instead of forming a company, you write software and build all the inputs and outputs. And usually it has token economics. So people that put stuff in get rewarded for putting stuff in. People that provide storage and network facilities get rewarded for doing that. But there's no company. It's like Bitcoin. If you think of Bitcoin, there is no company, but it's worth trillions of dollars, billions of dollars.
So how do decisions get made on
voting? The DAO builds in voting on. So Bitcoin has votes every now and then to basically determine whether to fork or change the software and so on. So it's basically voting based by the participants. It's a true demos. It's basically going back to the Greek demos, but using software to facilitate it and to deliver the services or the products.
And do we have any examples of other companies outside fintech, outside crypto, that operate on DAOs? I've written about them in the past. I remember going to an event, an event in Germany about 4 years ago in Berlin, when I first heard the term, and it was a buzz there. I always imagined these could work very well as an alternative to something like Uber, where the drivers would actually have power.
It could work for absolutely anything, because it's really interesting, Andrew, because in the Silicon Valley here, everyone talks about cutting out the middleman. Imagine if you cut out venture capital and startups from innovation. That's what's really going on here. And so venture capitalists, there was an article a couple of weeks ago that was in the newsletter by Thomas Tungers, who is certainly no dreamer, talking about the merits of taking tokens in DAOs as opposed to equity in companies as a reward structure for venture capital. And that puts the venture capitalists on the outside of the DAO, feeding in, as opposed to in the middle, helping construct and
So I
start.
get it. So let's use the example. Everybody knows that a DAO would be a much better idea in terms of an alternative to Lyft or Uber. The drivers would be in control. The VCs wouldn't make some sort of obscene killing. Why aren't there driver DAOs? Is it a logistical issue? Are people just not thinking of it?
Well, I think like with any use case, you have to ask what the competition is and what the market is. And the chances of a driver DAO being successful would depend on out-competing Uber and Lyft, which is probably too late to do. So DAOs are mainly focused on new markets.
Yeah.
And fintech being the leading one. One would expect, I will tell you this, what I'm doing at SignalRank, not to blow my own trumpet here, but just to help.
You never blow your own trumpet, Keith. I've known you long enough for that.
And it sounds really bad when I do, by the way. But basically,
show us your trumpet.
SignalRank is basically trying to automate the allocation of capital to startups based on data and analytics.
Yeah, but you're not a DAO. You're a classic startup. It's your idea. You're in control. You're raising the money. How would a DAO work in terms if you need to raise capital just to pay for office space or pay for technology? How does a DAO do that?
Basically, usually because it's distributed, there is no office space.
There's no need for capital.
And you need to write the software, and somebody either has to volunteer their time, or like with open source software, most DAOs are open source, by the way, and you can download the software from GitHub and see the software, so you know that the rules are real. So mostly it's open source contributed time, but the token system in some DAOs allows the participants to be rewarded in tokens. And these days, the interchange between tokens and fiat currencies are pretty much global now. There's a two-way transfer between the two usually, like through Coinbase, for example, or Binance. So I think, for the most part, decentralization is very close to the point where software will allow you to not have a company. To be honest, if I was reimagining SignalRank as a DAO, I could imagine it, which means it qualifies for what I call the unborn child. Unborn child is when everything required for life already exists. So you're looking at the end of the third trimester of a pregnancy, and you know that life is going to exist. You just have to bring it into being. Well, really good products are like that. Everything they need is already there. And so if I did SignalRank as a DAO, I would know how to do it now. Whereas 5 years ago...
Yeah, but then you put your labor in. Why would you do it? Your whole point of doing SignalRank is to make money. Well, you're suggesting that DAOs... Can you make money in DAOs?
Yeah, you can make serious money.
So who determines who owns what in a DAO?
Well, but the way it works, so think of a timeline against a DAO. So let's say day one, some venture capitalists, firstly a team, build some software, and they make some initial tokens that will be the currency of the DAO. Right.
So first in gets the best.
Well, initially all those tokens are held in some kind of treasury and no one owns them. Then the founders say, well, we're gonna own 20% of those tokens over 4 years. And a VC will come in and say, well, look, we'll buy another 20% of the tokens. And they buy the tokens before there's really a service or before they have value. And then the money that the VCs use to buy the tokens is used to pay for whatever needs to be paid for to get to the next stage.
Yeah,
Eventually,
I don't believe that VCs will buy into a network where there's no one in control. They're not going to invest their money in
no,
a
they
crowd.
Andrew. Well, yeah, actually, let's just give you
There's
some
got to be
credit.
accountability if people are
No,
going to put serious money in.
let's give you credit for that, which is that most VCs won't do it. But actually, the leading thinkers in the space are doing it already. Andreessen has done it quite a few times already, and is an advocate for token purchases as opposed to equity, sometimes both.
Mm.
If there is a company, they want equity as well. But where there is no company, like with Ethereum or Bitcoin, they can't buy equity because there is none. And so the only way to get into the value chain is to buy tokens, and they
Well,
do.
put the money using the money metaphor because it's not really money. Put the money quote up from the newsletter this week, Keith. This is Keith going back to his libertarian Marxist days. Go on, read it out. What you're saying.
So just a bit of context. There's a story profiling Peter Thiel from The Economist, and Peter Thiel is a well-known libertarian and
Yeah, and that book by Shafkin is Shafkin's gonna come on my show, actually, my keynote show soon, to talk about it.
So the book's called The Contrarian, and they're reviewing the book and kind of reviewing Peter Thiel through reviewing the book. So Elizabeth Yin's story about the end of the startup and Peter Thiel's libertarianism kind of come together. And this is the end of my editorial. In reality, the end of government with a small g, so it applies to companies as well as nations, and its replacement by autonomous governance is an entirely legitimate end goal for humanity. It is not capitalist or communist or even libertarian. It is inevitable. For that reason, the introduction of politics into discussions of progress and innovation does nothing to clarify the path or the goal or its desirability. Governments will try to stop, slow down, or control, governments with a big G, but ultimately cannot prevail. Ultimately, we, humans, will not need them.
You're sounding like, what's his name? John Perry Barlow. Put it back up. John Perry Barlow from the Grateful Dead guy who, of course, wrote the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. I mean, I agree that it's a legitimate end goal. I'm not arguing with that because any end goal, if you believe in it, I guess is legitimate. I don't know what's inevitable, though. Are you suggesting that the end goal is inevitable or the end of government is inevitable? Because those are two quite different things.
Well, we all learn from history that nothing is actually inevitable, because
especially the end of government. I mean, that's been predicted ever since we've had government, and it's never.
Yeah, but humans have a great capacity for not doing the obvious. So you can't predict
or quote unquote the inevitable. I mean, I spent last week, which why we didn't have a show, in Kazakhstan, which if you want to find an example, a model for why government isn't going away, go and visit Kazakhstan. I mean, as I said to you, Keith, off screen, dream on. It's a noble dream. I don't buy it, but it's interesting. And I think DAOs are interesting. I agree. I think they are the next big thing in a kind of conceptual, intellectual sense.
Yeah. There is one weighty point that underlies my use of the word inevitable. And let me just say what that is. Increasingly, technology is doing things that challenge governments with the big G ability to impact them. That's always been true in innovation, in that, that well-known mantra that technology is always ahead of policy. But in fact, it's widening. And the main driver is the global characteristics of the technology, and now underpinned by global money or global stores of value and global means of exchange that are tied to these DAOs. So increasingly, governments, in order to have power, have to wrestle with these global entities. And so if you were trying to visualize what's happening to Facebook and Amazon and Google right now, it would be lots and lots of national governments biting at their heels, trying to take a piece of flesh. And it's kind of a nightmare if you're a global player and successful in tech to have to manage all of those biting heel governments. Now, with DAOs, there's no company to go and bite. So it goes to the next level where there isn't even a target. And so then you get into the realms of impotence of governments. So the end of governments with the big G is obviously not meant to be taken literally, but it is a trend that is very real. And short of a global government, like a world government that agreed with each other to have rules for the whole world, technology's advantage is going to be massive. Now, obviously, in a private ownership framework, that's kind of scary because you get to the James Bond evil billionaire scenario. So we have to have a serious conversation about how to socialize globalization as opposed to individualizing it.
Yeah. Well, as I said, dream on. I mean, my reading of it is that DAOs are often used by governments as weapons against other governments. So you'll find that the Russian government, I think, is often financing and supporting these different kind of crypto DAOs in order to weaken Western capitalism. Anyway, it's an interesting story. Let's come back to reality, Keith, back to those biting heels which dominated this week's news again. Apple is playing hardball, you say, when it comes to regulation and who can and can't use its app store. What's happening on the Apple front this week?
So Apple yesterday, in response to a week where there was a lot of back and forth between itself and Epic, said it will not reinstate Epic's Fortnite developer account, meaning that Epic cannot resubmit their app to the App Store. And not only did it say it will not do it now, it said it will not do it until the legal process has completed all the appeal steps, which means that for the next 4 or 5 years, Epic cannot dream about having Epic Fortnite in the App Store. So this is Apple doubling down on. We had a bit of a discussion about whether Apple or Epic won. This is Apple saying we firmly believe we won. And
well, the reality is that Apple can afford to ditch Epic more than Epic can afford to ditch Apple, right? I mean, Apple doesn't really care that much. It's not going to make any that much difference to their bottom line if Epic's out of the App Store. If everyone else goes out of the App Store, if they all put down their quote-unquote tools and all these other companies leave the App Store, that's another issue. But that doesn't seem to be happening, is it? Are Epic finding any solidarity with other software companies, with any other app developers?
You know, not really. The CEO has gotten himself a bad rap because he lied and cheated by building a backdoor into his app and then sued Apple. And so it appears to the developer world as if the whole thing was a setup to get Apple in court, and then he didn't win. So he hasn't got a good reputation. So he doesn't.
And you and I think we're on the same side here. We're both sympathetic to Apple, aren't we?
I definitely am. I call it freeloading, trying to not pay Apple. And no developer is going to pull their app out of the App Store if it's making money. Because
at what point will the Epic board rebel and say this is absurd? We are destroying ourselves. We've miscalculated. This is a disastrous initiative, and let's just go back to sharing the money with Apple.
If they were rational, that is exactly what they do.
Why aren't they rational? People should be. I mean, capitalists are rational, aren't they, Keith? I mean, surely when the board at Epic sits down and they think, well, what's exactly happening here? We're losing. We're fighting a superpower. We're not a superpower, and we're going to lose.
Well, that goes back to human beings don't always do predictable things. This guy clearly is on a mission. I remember being in a similar frame of mind back in 2002 when I was a partner with Microsoft with real names, and Microsoft were asking me to do some things that I didn't really think were right, and I chose to fight them, and
And
I
you
lost.
lost, and I
I
hope you've
lost.
grown up since, Keith. What about Facebook? Is Facebook the next Epic or the next Apple? Because Facebook seems to be, of all the big tech companies, Facebook seems to have the worst PR, the worst behavior, and seems almost unsupportable, certainly in a moral sense. And their CTO just quit. Clearly had enough of all this nonsense. He has enough money to do whatever he wants. I mean, who wants to work at a place like that?
My guess is that Mike Schroepfer, known as Shrep, left probably for different reasons. If it was driven by what we're discussing here, he probably would have left a while ago. I actually know him. He almost, I can tell you a funny story. Michael Arrington and I, when we were doing Archimedes Labs, interviewed him and another friend of mine, Aref Hilali, to run Edgio, which was a company we were incubating. And at that time, Mike hadn't yet started TechCrunch, and Mike wanted to run Edgio. And I remember Mike telling me that he didn't approve of these two because he wanted to run it. So I ended up running Edgio. And Schroepfer went on to be the CTO of Facebook, and Aref is now at Bain Capital. They're both incredibly successful people. And had we hired them, I think Edgio probably would have been successful.
Maybe they've changed the name. That was the worst name I've ever heard of a startup, Edgio.
And anyway, then it's Edge.io, Andrew. Edge.
Even worse.
Basically,
I don't buy that about, you don't leave in the middle of a crisis.
He's basically, no, I'll say this. He's a really, really nice guy.
I'm sure he is. And I'm sure most of the people working at Facebook, I'm sure Zuckerberg, if you met him on the street or at a dinner party, he's probably very nice. But they're fucking up so royally, aren't they, at Facebook, Keith?
They are. But I'll tell you their bigger fuck up. And this is really why he left. This whole focus on the metaverse, virtual reality and augmented reality. He's an engineer's engineer, and I'm going to guess he just doesn't buy that direction at this stage.
Well, he was the head of AI at Facebook, and that's a big title as well. I mean,
yeah. So they've got a few screw ups. So let's talk about the screw ups. Number one, they somehow during the previous guy's regime accepted the role of a publisher by becoming an editor. The minute they did that, they're in a no-win situation because the whole world is on Facebook, and every point of view the human race has its expression in Facebook somewhere.
Yeah.
No matter how bizarre that view is. And suddenly they're responsible for cleaning it up. Well, that's a no-win situation completely. Then they start having opinions about what can and can't be in there and acting on them, which doubles the jeopardy.
Yeah.
And now in the press, they have to play the role of being accountable for what, not for what they've said, but for what people who use their platform are saying. And so that's they've driven the ship into a really, really bad place.
Well, plus there was a report, and I forgot to give you this link. It would have been interesting to put up. There was a report in the New York Times this week about how now Zuckerberg has decided that he wants to use Facebook to support his views, that he's moving away from the idea of Facebook as a neutral platform and will use it to promote the Facebook agenda in terms of all these disputes, which is even more depressing, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, one wonders how true that is. I'm gonna give him credit and say maybe that isn't true because
I can understand him. I mean, if you have a nuclear weapon down your pants and you're surrounded by people, in the end, you're going to use it. And he does have a nuclear weapon in the sense that, as you say, they're the most powerful publisher in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I would rephrase that to we, the people, are the most powerful publisher in the world now. And we have a tool to use to do that. More than one tool, actually, because Twitter is also really on a roll right now. and LinkedIn itself is as well. I think there's a bunch of tools that we, the people, can use to become the collective publisher. Within that, of course, there's all of the problems you focus on in your book, The Culture of the Amateur, which is not all publishers are smart, good, or
Right.
honest.
Plus, we have, and we don't want to keep on coming back to this, but it's the reverse of the stuff we started with. Instead of DAOs, these companies are increasingly centralized, and in Facebook's case, controlled by a single individual. So it's
Correct.
the absolute reverse of the DAO ideal. What about Peter Thiel? Let's come back to him. You have this profile. Thiel, of course, was the founding investor in Facebook, made his initial fortune from that. I mean, he had a smaller fortune from PayPal. I wonder what Thiel thinks about Facebook right now. I don't even know. Does he still have a relationship with Zuckerberg? I assume he does.
Yeah. I actually, funnily enough, I know a lot of people in the Valley, and I actually don't know Peter Thiel. I've never met him and never spoken
I
with him.
met him once in one evening in Colorado. He's a very peculiar fellow, very insecure, very German.
So I kind of like a lot about Peter Thiel. I like his contrarianism. I think the world needs contrarians. I don't object to his conservatism particularly. I disagree with it, but fine. That's who he is, and that's what he believes. I think that there's something very healthy about there's something very healthy and human about people who believe more in the market than in governments. I do think the market is another word for people. And I do think that, people left to their own devices will do smart things.
So
So
what's he better? So you're right about Thiel. He's incredible. I mean, I hate his politics, and as a person, I don't like awkward Germans. But I don't like awkward people generally. But he's always been right about the next big thing. He obviously was right about Facebook. He was right about PayPal. Are you saying he's betting on DAOs now? Does he see these autonomous organizations as the future of capitalism?
I don't know his exact point of view about DEOs, but this is the quote from him here. Let me zoom into it because it's better than my quote. This is, if AI is communist, crypto is libertarian, he wrote last year. He would look favorably on cryptocurrencies and blockchains. He's a big backer of Block.one, who owns Bullish, which is going public in a SPAC. Good luck with that one. SPACs are not really working out very well right now. But basically, yes, he believes in distributed software with tokens as currencies, and he's probably navigating those waters pretty much all the time. And
Yeah,
something
as you
that,
are, as
yeah,
Arrington is, as a lot of the smart people in tech are. I mean, it's clearly the future. It's just what kind of future it is, and as so often, it's timing when this future will arrive.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And anyway, this book looks something like a very readable
Yeah, the
book.
Chafkin book. I'm going to have him on my Keenon show I'm just talking to the publisher. I'm going to get him on in a couple of weeks. Be interesting. You said that the book's a bit unfair, that it just lays into him as a Trump person, which is very easy. It's just a straw man, really.
Yeah, I actually think that we're suffering right now. It's almost like the world has turned into Fox News and MSNBC. The,
Yeah, I agree. And CNN's also awful.
and CNN. So there's all these labels. The nice thing about America used to be the lack of ideology, and people would just take ideas on their merit. But now there's all these labels. So you're a libertarian, or you're a socialist, or you're a communist, which means no one actually talks about the actual ideas, and that is a problem for me.
That's why That Was the Week is the best show of the week, isn't it, Keith? Because we're beyond ideology here, or pre-ideology, or
Post-ideology, maybe.
or bi-ideological. I believe in government, you don't, but we respect each other. What about my favorite moment of the week, startup of the week? You got a really interesting startup this week, actually. What is it?
The startup is Canva, and Canva,
Australian, right?
yeah. Canva is basically an art board for the internet. Think of it that way. So it competes with Adobe, let's say, in some ways, not the whole of Adobe, but parts of what Adobe does. It's been very.
And that 3D company in the North Bay, what's it called?
I'm bad with names, so never ask me what the name
Yeah.
is. Never remember. But anyway, they raised 200 million at a 40 billion valuation. And the interesting thing here is the biggest conversation is how do they get to revenue, because their product is mainly free.
So it's a software. It's a cloud software for consumers.
Yeah. Well, for anyone who wants to design stuff for devices, the web browsers, iPhones, tablets.
So it would seem like a natural fit with Pinterest. There's a sort of weird symmetry with something like Pinterest.
Yeah, well, actually, Pinterest is more consumer. This is more. Think of it as a creative version of Slack. It's for businesses. It comes into a business via a single individual choosing to use it, a bit like Slack did, and then it spreads out. There's another company called Miro, Miro, that does whiteboards and product development around whiteboards or plans around whiteboards. That's also huge. And
yeah, someone said on the notice on our notice board, digital designers for non-designers, which is an old idea. I mean, that's really been around since Web 1.0, right?
Yeah, he is.
So what are they doing that's so good and smart? How have they figured out 40 billion without much revenue?
They basically have just kept growing and growing and growing by building great features that people want to use, offering joining for free and then upgrading to premium and paying. But
so not very revolutionary, not very DAO like, Keith. Centralized tools for internet users.
Yeah, this is very Web 2.0, not Web 3.0. Web 2.0 is cloud, centralized companies using the cloud.
But it's even more web. It's not even Web 2.0. It's Web 1.0 in a way.
Well, the fact that it's interactive and programmable means it's Web 2.0. But yes, it's definitely not Web.
So how are they going to monetize? You say they've got no revenue at the moment, so they're not relying on advertising. So it's not a front-facing website. It's not like Facebook or Twitter. You don't.
It's more like it is a website and it is front-facing, but it's more like an app. It's a website, but it's an app.
Right. So are they must have some revenue. You said they're upselling, so there's a free version and then a paid version.
Yeah, here's their website. And you see it says try Pro for 30 days or get Canva for free. So obviously everyone gets Canva for free. They do have some revenue. It's just that most of their users are free. So the biggest discussion is how do they grow their revenue? It's $119.99 for up to 5 people per month, by the way, over a year.
Oh, so no, it's sort of like the video. So it's sort of like a version of Vimeo. I mean, it's like all these companies. There's a free version.
Yeah.
And they're upselling.
From a business model point of view, it's freemium. It's called freemium. And by the way, I was
wrong. Not very original, not very radical, but clearly having an impact.
Yeah. Let's say we wanted to design lower thirds for our show.
Okay.
Like we've got here. If I turn it on, I used Adobe Illustrator to create that. Well, I could have done it on Canva and pay $1.99 a month for their pro version, $1.99 per person per month.
So what is Adobe? Because, I use their Lightroom and their video products. I assume they have a similar product too. They must be responding to this.
They don't really have anything like as good a product as this because they're coming from a desktop applications world. And if you think of Adobe as an applications company for the desktop or for mobile device, but they're very application-centric. They're not cloud-centric. Canva is 100% cloud-centric. It doesn't have any applications that run on devices. So it's a SaaS version of some of Adobe's features.
So it's a sort of a Benioff-style company.
Yeah. So I pay $600 a year for Adobe Creative Cloud.
Yeah.
I could do Canva for 5 people for $120 a
So
year.
you think that there'd be a natural acquisition of a Microsoft or a Salesforce or someone like that?
Yeah, but once you're worth 40 billion, that's easier said than done. There aren't many companies who can pay 40 billion or
How much
more.
is Adobe worth?
Adobe, good question. I can tell you exactly how much Adobe is worth if you give me a second. Adobe is worth Adobe. Let's type it in. Adobe is worth 295 billion.
Ooh.
So it would be getting up to 20% of Adobe's market cap to buy Canva, which they're not going to do. Here we go. You can see it here.
Right,
So
it's good. That shows real businesses, real markets, real need. So that's a little bit more concrete and real than DAOs. What about the tweet of the week, Keith, this week?
the tweet of the week this week harkens us back to the subject of seed stage startups.
Oh, your favorite subject.
This is triggered by the fact that Reid Hoffman's fund, Greylock, well, it's not his fund, but he's there, announced a $500 million seed fund. And this guy, Hadley, who I don't know, said that the fact of the matter is that more than 9 out of 10 founders can't raise $1 million to fund their startup. They're seeing $500 million seed funds get raised and know damn well that none of it is coming to them. It will be divvied up in large chunks to the same founders who were going to raise anyway.
Is that true, or is the real truth that 9 out of 10 founders have shitty companies and shitty ideas and aren't worth funding?
It's more than 9 out of 10. It's
97 or 8 out of 100.
Exactly, at least. And
at least, so 99. It can't be 100.
It's 99 point something, and you can.
So
look
1 out of 1,000, 2 or 3 out of 1,000 are worth funding. Well, that's true of anything. It's true of publishing. It's true of books.
I can tell you the
numbers. It's true of online shows. I mean, most stuff's crap.
I'll tell you the numbers because this is my world at Single Rank. There are 25,000 funding rounds a year up to Series B, from seed to Series B. 25,000 a year. For every funding round, there's 99 trying to get funded that don't. So if you multiply 25,000 by 100, you get to 2.5 million requests for funding a year, of which 25,000 get funded. Of those 25,000 that get funded, only 2,500 are being funded by smart investors who have a track record. And of those 2,500, only 250 make it to become decent-sized companies. So, but 250 out of 2.5 million, that's the number.
And that's the Hobbesian reality. I don't see how that gets replaced by DAOs, because out of every 1,000 DAOs launched, 998 will be worthless. So I don't see the difference.
No, well, the difference will be the ones that are successful, how the reward is distributed. So there will be a difference, but it won't. The failure rate won't slow down, because failure is the mother of invention, right? I mean, just think how many things we've failed at. And everyone focuses on your successes, but to have those successes, you had to fail a lot. So I think failure is the mother.
Yeah, but I think that tweet suggests that for most people, failure is endemic, and that there is a certain group of insiders who get funded, whether or not they succeed or fail. Isn't that what that tweet's saying?
It's not insiders. I mean,
or people who are connected, people who know someone who knows Hoffman.
Yeah, but you can get to know people. When I turned up in Silicon Valley wearing a suit in 1997 and foolishly thought that wearing a suit would, be a good thing in Sand Hill Road, I was an outsider. And I stayed an outsider for 12 months. Then I built some software, cut a deal with Alta Vista, went live, and had Draper Fisher and Bill Gross's Idea Lab wanted to give me money, and they wouldn't have taken a meeting with me 3 months before that.
Well, Tim
So
Draper still wears a suit. He wears very colorful ties. I'm not sure the suit was the issue, Keith.
no, Tim. Well, it is for a startup founder. Tim wears a suit, but he doesn't expect you to wear a suit when you pitch him.
Yeah, and I know Tim's a regular viewer. Tim, if you're watching, hope you're well. Hope you got your suit on this morning. What do you do with your Keith? Keith, what happened to all those suits you brought over from the UK? Did you burn them symbolically in your palatial yard in Palo Alto?
I'll tell you, the funny thing is, as I was flying back to London to represent the fund ADV, I had to I left a suit in London. As soon as I landed Monday morning, I'd be putting it on with a tie, because London still lives in that era where wearing a suit and a tie is a requirement of being taken seriously.
Well, that's
Not
why
for
we're
everyone.
here. That's why Keith and I left England. We're not suit wearing guys. We're in California. That was the week for September the 24th. Will it be, it'll be October next time we meet, Keith.
It will indeed.
So that's inevitable. I'm not sure about your DAOs and the end of government, but certainly the end of September 2021 is inevitable. We will see you in October. Have a good end of September, everyone, and we'll look forward to next week. Thanks so much for watching.
Agreed. Otherwise known as the beginning of October.
We're at the beginning of the end of September, as Winston Churchill so famously said.
Bye.